Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Life Process podcast. Whether you're a new listener or you've been listening for a while, we are just so grateful to have you listening in with us, being a part of the Real Life Process community. One of the things we value here at the process is being present to one another. And one of the ways that I love to be present with you is to show up each and every week here on the podcast. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like for some reason that this past week and maybe the week coming forward are kind of a transitional time. Here in the United States, as we celebrate what we call Memorial Day weekend, it seems to be quite a shift for everyone, either the week before or even this coming week, of just getting back into different behaviors, rhythms, and routines. So for many people that I have talked to over the last couple of weeks, that is kind of where we're at. It is transition. But I'm also feeling even a bigger transition, both personally and in the work that I'm doing out into the world and just in many places. And I think transition is something that, depending on our personality and our work styles and our rhythms and our behaviors and routines, can sometimes throw us off a bit if we're not careful. So I'd like to talk about that just a little bit today and some of the thoughts that I'm having. But before we get to that conversation, I'd love to ask you a favor. If you have listened to the podcast for a while, but you've never left a review of the podcast, would you mind going out to your favorite podcast player, wherever you listen, and leaving us a review? Now, for many of you, that's going to be through an Apple product. And so if you just go to the podcast and you click on the place where you can leave a review, we would love to hear a couple of sentences. And just, I was looking back through those and I'm like, wow, we haven't had a review in a while. And reviews are so important in just helping to get the podcast out to listeners. So if you could leave us a review, we would so appreciate it. I will reach out to you personally and thank you for leaving that review. It means so much to us. So if you can do that, we would appreciate it. Well, let's get back to this conversation about transition. I think that anytime there's kind of a seasonal shift, it gives us an opportunity to get up on the balcony and look at where we are and where we want to go. And there's lots of different reasons that might happen. There are seasonal transitions like we're in this weekend with kind of a holiday weekend here in the States, and then moving into kind of what we would call summertime activities. So seasonal transitions come up in our lives. Actual transitions around, our children many times, whether they're going to college or they're starting school, or like even in my case, we're anticipating the birth of our very first grandchild here in just a few weeks. And so that's going to be a transition for my husband and I. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons that this is resonating within my brain right now, is because of that. But it's not a time to like pull away from everything and adjust. But it is a time to get back up on the balcony and say, as we often do here at the process, as we teach you to do and help you discover, is what matters to me? What really matters right now in this season of life? It's one of the reasons why I love creating, and part of the work that we do, and the book that I have written, and the way that we coach, and the way that we certify others to coach, is to say, what's my rule of life? What are the things that really matter to me? How can I manage my life, personal life management, and kind of set up a baseline of this is the way I do life, because I've really looked at what my needs and my values are, what my personality is, all of those things that we talk about and you've heard us talk about on the podcast. and really defining these are the areas that matter in my life. Once we've done that, then when transition comes, when a seasonal shift comes or a bigger personal shift comes in our life, we can at least rely on the baseline, the rule of life of going, oh, yes, this is what makes me who I am, and this is what I believe in. Because as Dave Ramsey often says, Murphy's going to move into the bedroom. There are times when our world is just going to be rocked. It could be the smallest of things. The car breaks down, the washing machine doesn't work, we have an accident, all of those types of things, to major tragic life events. But we know that baseline, getting up on the balcony and creating that baseline of our life is what's going to be the foundational piece, spiritually, emotionally, physically, having those baselines. Here at the process, we call that a rule of life. And once we've established that, then in these seasons of transition, it doesn't feel quite like, oh, I've got to start all over again. Like I need to pull out a new recipe for life and look at the new ingredients I'm going to put in and start all over again. We don't want you to feel that starting all over all the time thing. It's why we even talk about doing what we call 90-day resets, right? Like getting up there and saying every 90 days or so, what's it look like right now? That can be a way that you can easily transition then into especially these seasonal changes. So I was reading in an email this week, and I really loved what this email blog was talking about. And I think this is another word that sometimes we can use in the summertime. Well, I'm just going to go with the flow. And that can sound like good advice. And, it sounds like, oh, I'm on this is what this author wrote in this blog. I'm on this gentle river. But actually, it's kind of not great advice, because sometimes when you have lost your footing and you're being pulled under by the current, if we don't exert a serious... Okay, we're going to clip that at 7:39. We're going to go back to probably 7 minutes in. And I'm actually going to stop it. So I was reading in an email this week that came through a blog that I was reading. And the author, the writer of this blog, was talking about this idea of having order in our life, having some structure to our life. And he said this: go with the flow can sound like good advice when you are enjoying yourself on a gentle river, but it is terrible advice when you have lost your footing and are being pulled under by a current. In the latter case, if we don't exert serious force, we'll experience significant damage. Then he goes on to say, going with the flow is often only possible if we first establish our own baseline in order to counterbalance the chaotic effects of the world around us and sometimes our own inner conflict. This is why, and he's referring to the practice that monks have. He says, this is why monks follow established rhythms, rituals, and rules. These measures are put into place not in a means to restrict the freedom of its members, but rather to allow their full flourishing. These proactive measures ensure a solid footing, making it possible to engage deeply with life. I love what he's saying there. Now, most of us aren't practicing as monks, but practicing around that same way of what are the practices? It's chapter 10, actually, in my book, of what are the practices behind the process? What are the behaviors, rhythms, and routines that you can put into your life so that when changes come, whether, like I said, seasonally or otherwise, you have some baseline. So the flow can feel different in the summer. That's kind of what we're talking about here. But if we've established that, it can help counter the chaos. The chaos of like, oh, we're going to go on vacation for a week. How do I get back into rhythms, routines, and behaviors when we get back? Well, if we haven't established them in the first place, that's going to be a little more difficult. So I want to encourage you, even if you establish small behaviors in this seasonal transitional shift of maybe a new season, maybe it's that you're going to get up a half an hour earlier, or you're going to go to bed earlier, or that you're not going to watch television after a certain time at night, or you're going to have a rhythm and behavior for your kids if they're home from school, or you're going to learn something new over the summer. Many times for some of you, a transitional shift seasonally means space opens up differently. Maybe your job shifts a little bit and you have a little more space, or something that you're doing allows for some learning opportunity. One of the things that we're doing this summer here at the Process is we're actually doing a cohort certification. And so if you're interested in getting certified with our content, we're going to have a 6-week cohort this summer that you could dive into. It doesn't even start till late July, but it'll be done before Labor Day. So maybe that's something that you're putting on your list of, I want some new learning. You can find more about that learning at thereallifeprocess.com/get certified. It's just a 6-week cohort to be certified. If you're a coach, a speaker, a trainer, maybe that's something this summer that you're like, I want to put that in. I want to take advantage of something new that I want to learn. I was leading some women in some group coaching that I do here in my local community, and we were talking about the summer transition and this flow and using their baseline. But one of the women said, I said, what are things you want to do with your family this summer? You know, maybe weekend getaways, day trips, different things. And she said, I have a list of things, but the action I need to take is to talk to my spouse about those things and to make sure that we both have it on our calendar. So this traditional, what we call Memorial Day weekend, the start of summer, might be a time too that you want to sit down and establish some dates on the calendar, some practical things that you want to do, so you don't get to Labor Day and say, oh, I wished we could have. I wished we would have. I also want to encourage you, as you think about summer, to not pack it so full with things that there isn't any margin. I often say that the memories are made in the margins. If I were to ask you to just slow down and think for a minute of your own childhood, your own years of the lazy days of summer, we used to call them, many times our memories will be around special things that happened in the moment. Things like bike rides and baking cookies and going to the pool and some of those types of things, or a trip that you took, just spontaneous. So don't pack this season so full that just because the weather has shifted or changed, or it's summer, that you think it has to be packed full of activities. Just encourage you to allow that margin. As someone who loves to be super productive, I often call myself a recovering workaholic. I can tend to think that the summer needs to just be packed. When I want those spontaneous times for my husband and I, and as I'm shifting into this new season of being a grandparent, I want to allow the margins for the memories as well. So as you think about this transition, as you think about transitions, here's what I want you to think about. Remember to establish the baseline. What are the rhythms and routines and behaviors that you want? Establish that so that when the week through the summer doesn't go exactly as you've got the baseline, you've got the rhythms and routines in place. You've been up on the balcony a little bit. Take time to do that. Take time to have the conversations with your family members and with other people, maybe even immediate family of, trips and travels and extended family and friends and all of that you want to do in the next 3 to 4 months. And then maybe allow some time for some learning, for something special that you want to learn and that you want to take in. Maybe it's reading a book, maybe it's a certification program, maybe it is a new learning around a hobby or something like that. Just encourage you to make the best of summer as you think about transitioning into this different season. If you'd like some resources around some of these things, you can go to thereallifeprocess.com. We'd love to have you on our email list. We have some free resources that you can download. And then each and every week, we send one email a week on Thursdays with some encouragement and some things that are going on and with a link to the podcast. We'd love to have you join our email list and stay up to date on all the things here at the Real Life Process. So as we wrap up this episode, remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment in it. And as you look for those this summer, I'd love to hear from you. I always love to hear from the listeners. You can email me, Teresa@thereallifeprocess.com, and just say, I just had an extraordinary moment. I would love to hear yours. So we'll be back next week for more here at the Real Life Process and the podcast. And have a great week, everyone. We'll talk soon.